everyone. So great to see you here. I hope you are following chat and seeing all the amazing places that people are calling in from for this very exciting launch of Rethinking Users. I'm Susanna Statz. You will not hear much from me. You'll hear me back at the end for the Q&A. I'm just here to help moderate the chat. Feel free to put any questions you have as they come up. I'll be checking that. And then you're going to hear some stories, you're going to hear some theory behind this book, you're going to get a peek at the design process of creating this awesome book that we have here. And with that, no more from me. Mike, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Are we seeing our faces here?
Looks good on my end.
I see your face.
Okay. It looks like we're good, Mike.
All right. I just had to make an adjustment. Thanks, Susanna.
So we have about 64 people from all over the country, and there's still people are rolling in fast as we talk. So it's all yours.
Excellent. Thanks. I'm Mike. I'm very briefly. I'm one of the co-authors, and you'll hear more from me in a minute.
Hey guys, I'm Ben, co-author number 2. Like Mike, you're going to hear more from me soon.
And Nadim, I designed and illustrated it, so all complaints about the content can go to Mike and Ben, and all praise about the design of the book can come to me.
Fair enough. So should I take it away? Okay. So hey, everybody, thanks a million for coming. I know that you're all coming from a lot of different time zones. It's a really nice time of day right here in California. And so if you're here in this part of the country or the planet, welcome, and welcome to everybody else as well. We want to give a quick thanks to Susanna for being our host and moderator. And we want to thank all of you for coming today. We also want to thank our publisher, BIS Publishing in Amsterdam. They were just fabulous to work with. That was a really good relationship. And so they encouraged us to do this official launch. We also want to thank all of our friends and family and colleagues and students in the past who we've sort of run some of these ideas past and some of the illustrative work and design work. And we couldn't have done this without a lot of time and input from all of you fabulous people who are our ecosystem of folks that we really depend on. So since the European launch of this book, which was in September, different timing than the US launch, we've been doing a lot of workshops and very formal kinds of things with lots of slide presentations and all that kind of stuff. And we thought for this, the US launch, which just happened, and this is our formal celebration of that, we wanted to make it less formal and more personal. And so you're going to see more of our faces than slides. And we're going to give a little more of a behind the scenes view. But stick around, because after I talk for a while and after Ben talks for a little bit, Nadim is up third, and he's going to share some images, some behind the scenes views of the illustration and design of Rethinking Users, which is really sort of like beautifully constructed, and it speaks so well, both I hope in terms of the words that we put on the paper, but also all the rest of the imagery and the structure of the book. So stick around for Nadim and the visual delight. So what we're going to do here is this. I'm going to speak very quickly, just for about less than 10 minutes. Then I'm going to pass over to Ben, and he's going to share some thoughts and experiences for around less than 10 minutes. And then Nadim will come up, and then we're going to reserve all the rest of the time for your comments and questions, moderated by Susanna. So here we go. So the ideas in this book have been sort of percolating for a while for both Ben and myself. Personally, I trace them back to sort of a seminal moment it was almost about 10 years ago, where I was riding a train from a rural town, small town in Connecticut in the eastern United States, down to New York City. And this was a commuter train early in the morning. And a lot of people were sort of getting in work mode and focusing, trying to concentrate and really just, starting their morning out with their coffee. And there was one guy in this train car who I like to call Loud Man. And Loud Man was just going on and on, talking on his phone. And he was talking to clients. He was talking to apparently to a wife or a girlfriend or somebody. And he was just obnoxiously loud. And everybody in the car was suffering from this. So at one point, there was a guy, another passenger sitting next to me, and he just sort of moaned you know, kind of almost to himself. And he said, you know, when is that guy going to stop using his phone? And then another person, so like 2 rows up, chimed in, turned around and said, hey, when are we all going to stop using that guy's phone? And it was just such a really fascinating moment for me, because though I'm in this business of trying to understand how users experience things, how people experience things that get designed, products, services, public parks, you name it, I had never really considered the extent to which we focus on kind of one user at the expense of others. So the people who created this man's cell phone, Loud Man's cell phone, they undoubtedly spent a lot of time thinking about how to create the optimal experience for him and to make that thing work as well as it can for that guy and give him a fabulous product. But they did that at the expense of all the rest of us on the train. They hadn't considered the other people involved and the experience they were going to have with that product. So this realization was especially stunning to me because I'm in this business, and I had actually even spent several projects working with clients in the mobile phone space, helping to design devices, helping to design services, and actually studying the folks who use mobile phones and going into their homes and trying to understand their experiences and their needs, and trying to understand how to create the best experience for them, or even to delight them with features and functions on the phone. And despite that, despite having had that much immersion in looking at that relationship between people and the thing we were creating, I had never really considered all those other folks who also experience a mobile phone in different ways. So it was a real sort of surprise moment for me, and it left a lasting impact. And so just right there, I'd like to pause and take a quick poll. Like you should all have a poll pop up on your desktop here. And if you have a second to answer it, have you ever had an experience like that where you're observing somebody using something that was created for them to use, and it's working awesome for them, but it's creating a bad experience or a problem for you because they're using it? Let me know. Here's, I'm going to send the poll out, and while the numbers are rolling in, I'll just keep talking. Looks like a lot of yeses, 1 no, a lot of yeses. Yeah, so okay. Not everybody has voted yet for sure, but we're seeing a lot of indication that this is a common experience. So why is it, if this is such a common experience, why is it in the design world that we often overlook that experience and those situations? So Rethinking Users it's a book and it's a toolkit, and it's our attempt to think about users differently, to think about those other experiences that people have, and to open up the design challenge to be more mindful of the whole ecosystem of people who experience the stuff that we create. So we've got a really broad range of people here. So I know that some of you work in this space, either as design researchers like Ben and I, or as designers like Nadim. And so I wanted to, since I don't know if all of you do, I want to back up just a little bit and talk about the idea of the user. It's an idea that's really fundamental to design of products and services as we do it today. The notion is that when we create something, whether it's an organization or a government or a design firm or a business, when we create something, a product, a service, a public park, it should be not just aesthetically pleasing, it should be not just interesting, it should be not just innovative, using new materials or making it look different than anything had before. It should actually be useful, valuable, and usable, easy to use for real people. There we go. I can share the results there of our poll. It's 56-2. So this is what we mean by user-centered design or human-centered design. It's an approach to design that says things shouldn't just be aesthetically pleasing or technically accomplished. They should also work, and they should solve problems for folks, and they should help people get things done rather than get in the way or create new problems. So when we talk about user-centered design, we think of it as something that's being really great. It's awesome, right? It helps people get stuff done. But we think that there is a little bit of an update that's required, because when we think about users in user-centered design, we tend to think of, if you look at this visual here, of this person holding this blue object. This is how we normally think about users, as somebody who has a very sort of direct, very personal, very hands-on, very one-directional subject-object relationship with the things, the products or services that they experience. And that's great. That is a user. That is a particular user type, just like Loud Man. This is Loud Man on the train. The problem is, and the challenge that we're trying to raise for people in rethinking users, is that there are so many other ways that people can engage things. There are so many other types of user experience or human experience that are relevant and important, and that those experiences are all sort of linked together in important ways. So it becomes almost an ecosystem of users. So I'm going to wind up here because there's so much more to share with you. But I want to say that this book is based on two fundamental propositions. One is, the first proposition is that there's something deficient about the way we think about the user in user-centered design. And the second proposition is, because the way we think about the user in user-centered design, there's also something deficient about the products and services that we design, that we create on the basis of that notion of the user, because we're missing out on so many other types of experiences, and we're blinded to all the other possibilities for our product and services and the different ways that they could serve other people. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and one day I was sitting down with Ben, and I said, hey, Ben, you're also in this field, though you work on different kinds of stuff than I do. Have you ever thought about this challenge? Have you ever thought about all the different ways that people can experience something? And I said that to Ben, and Ben said...
And I said, Mike, I haven't been able to think about anything other than this issue. And let me share with you guys the experiences that I shared with Mike at this dinner table. So my introduction to this concept came from my work, initial work watching surgeries happen in order to help the people who design medical devices make them better. And so operating rooms are full of these high-tech tools that have been narrowly, perfectly tailored to the needs of the surgeon, the person who's going to use them, or at least one of the people who's going to use them. And the clients that were hiring, the company I worked for, were super focused that the surgeon was the user. They wanted to know everything they could about them, and these devices were going to work great for them. But what I could see standing in these rooms as an anthropologist is that there were lots of other users in the picture. I would see, I'm going to give you guys a preview of the book. I would see this, a room full of people clustered around the surgeon, all of whom had to be able to use those devices in different ways. There were nurses who had to hand them off to the surgeon and calibrate them and retrieve them when the doctor was done. There were technicians who had to bring them in from storage and prepare them. Somebody had to take them away when they were done and maybe clean them to reuse them or trash them. These people were all super important. And if I could also see all kinds of situations in which if any one of them couldn't use these devices, even though they were going to use them for something in a really different way than the surgeon, the whole operation would break down. It was a disaster. But they were all completely invisible to the device makers. It was literally an invisible ecosystem in the operating room around these devices. And so it was talking with Mike about this that really led us to start to think about, what if we broke this down in a way where we started to analyze concretely all the different kinds of relationship that somebody can have with a product or a service or a space, anything that's designed. So Mike's already talked about one kind of relationship. I'm giving you guys another preview of what's in the toolkit, these cards. The direct user relationship. You can be Loud Man. You can be the surgeon. You can be the person who's this tool is designed for, and you're going to use it for your own purpose. That's great. But that is, as Mike said, only one kind of relationship. You could also have a more ambient relationship with a device, like Mike and the other passengers on his train car listening to the guy on the phone. That's a user experience too. They're not choosing to engage with this thing. They don't have any control over how it's being used, but they are using it because of the way it's present in their environment. Or another possibility, you could be one of the people that I saw in these operating rooms, an intermediary, where you have to have a concrete experience of this device, but it's for really, you're not really using it for your purpose. You're there to help set it up for somebody else who relies on you. And as Mike and I dug into this concept of relationships, we actually arrived at, I can't fan these out quite widely enough, 15 concrete different ways that somebody could relate to something that's designed. And we call these user archetypes. And in Rethinking Users, we created we created this book and this toolkit, the book and the set of cards, to map all this out, to make this very concrete, explain all these different archetypes. And also we crafted 6 concrete exercises that you, as an individual or a team, can go through to take these archetypes and use them for a practical purpose. Like what kind of practical purpose? Well, let's say you're designing something brand new and you want to understand who's going to use it, or you have a product or service in the world and you really want to understand the whole ecosystem around it. The framework that we created and the exercises that are mapped out in the book and the toolkit are all ways that they are meant to walk an individual or a team, regardless of whatever it is, even if it's just something abstract like a policy. Think about what's the total ecosystem around that designed thing, and to rethink literally who you can be serving and how. So Mike and I started to hammer this out, not just in sort of coffee table conversations, but in a series of classes that we taught at the design school at Stanford, workshops that we taught to different groups around the country. And as we started to flesh this out, because we realized there's something in here. This could be a book. This could be actually something that would be worth documenting in this way. As we worked on it, eventually we connected with BIS publishers who Mike called out, and crucially, the third member of the team, who I'm going to hand this off to in a minute, Nadim, who is I'm going to hand this off so that Nadim can share the incredible dimension he brought to this of a whole visual design language for the project. With that, Nadim, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Can you see my screen, folks? Cool. So first, I'll just share a little bit about, when you get Rethinking Users, what's in this box that Mike and Ben just showed. I think first of all, we have the book, and then there's the 15 user archetypes that Ben had just mentioned. We've also included 3 blank archetype cards, assuming that this 15 are the best that we came up with, but I'm sure in your line of work you'll come up with new archetypes that you can tailor to yourself. So we have blank cards, you can add post-it notes to them and add them to some of the activities that come in the book. There are 6 team exercises and they're outlined in detail in the book, but we've also included them on cards, the kind of mini version on cards, so that when you get together with teams, you can do some of these, you can have a quick reference for some of these activities. The book has a lot of illustrations in them. I'll show a little bit more of it in a second. And Mike and Ben kind of pulled me in some of the kind of early moments of them working on the manuscript, and we started thinking kind of like fundamentally, what should this book and toolkit be like together. We knew we wanted this set of cards, which they had used in a lot of the activities that they'd done with students and in workshops. And then we knew we had the book, which kind of outlines a little bit more theory and goes into more detail. I never designed a book before, but I have a background in industrial design. So I did what I would typically do and started sketching some concepts. We built some prototypes of different ways the cards and the book could live together. One thing for those of you who have the book, will see is that it's actually the same exact size as my notebook, which I did because I'm the designer and I can do what I want. But also it was just something I carry around all the time and just felt like a really nice size for a book. And when you bisect that notebook in half, it's actually like a perfect size for the cards, which is how we kind of ended up where we did with the final design of the book. And when Mike and Ben first pulled me in, we started trying to think conceptually around the visual direction we wanted to take. I think when they were imagining something a lot sketchier than what it ended up being. So probably, I think something more like this. But we looked at a bunch of different ways we could think about the visual strategy of the book. And we actually ended up on this third concept that you see on the right. We nicknamed it Serious Play, which I think combined both this sort of like classic modernism from the 50s and 60s, where a lot of these ideas around user-centered and human-centered design first emerged. And so we want to take that and give it a refresh in the same way that Mike and Ben, through the idea of user ecosystems, was kind of rethinking user-centered design. And so that plays out in some of the visual side too. So the typography is like, we use Utopia and Futura are the fonts in the book, which I like because they have this sort of like optimistic ring alongside the contents of the book, but also are very classic fonts, but paired it with some of this kind of fun illustration style. And we treated it like a project. So many of the people on this call, were part of feedback sessions where we got feedback on illustrations, on layouts, on book covers, on the name of the book, all kinds of stuff. We treated it like a project. And through this, we aligned on a couple different principles. The first, and they're rooted in the content of the book. The first is, these are not necessarily personas or people, which you'll often hear in the industry, but we purposely made these archetypes and tried to make them really abstract. So the archetypes in the book, the little characters, are almost as simple as kind of stick figures, but we put these like round circular bodies, really geometric, to give it a little bit more character and uniqueness. The second principle was this idea that you'll see is all of the users and the ecosystems in which they live are kind of interconnected. So, a single line connects a lot of these. And that was another way that we were physically showing the kind of ecosystem of how a lot of these users are connected to each other, and the interactions of one person could affect someone else. This also plays out in the objects too. So there's interesting parts of the book where we talk about how users and objects are often interconnected in their relationships. And there's times where the things we typically think of how users use products can get reversed, where products are almost using you, especially with things like technology. So again, you see the idea of this interconnected single continuous line ecosystem. And then the last concept was just this idea that products and services aren't just used in a single moment, but over larger moments of time and space. So Ben talked about the ambient user, this commercial kitchen spread, which is actually two pages of 4 pages across 2 spreads, outlines all of the users and how they could interact within the in this case, the environment of a commercial kitchen. So users, some users are using the kitchen in parallel, others are using it serially. Sometimes we have ambient users who are just walking by and they're experiencing the smells and the sounds of the kitchen as well. And so we want to show how in these kind of bigger scenes, how these things are all interconnected again. And finally, like within this design system that we created, I just kind of had fun with it and taking some of these principles, and there's a lot of like little fun, almost jokes or little Easter eggs if you look closely through the book. And so, yeah, with that little kind of sneak peek of what's inside the book, I'll hand it back over to Mike to talk a little bit about what you can do to kind of put some of this stuff in practice.
Thanks, Nadeem. I always love seeing that stuff. So we want to tell you a little bit about, of course, we're excited about the book and we'd love you to be excited about it too. So we do want to mention who we think it's for. So as we were writing this book, and as Nadeem was designing it, and we were all working together on this, we were trying to figure out who exactly our audience is. And we thought that these ideas had much more to say, not just to design researchers like Ben and myself, or designers like Nadeem. We thought there was a wider audience of folks who could benefit from this. And so really, we're trying to reach out to innovators, to people working in startups or envisioning working in startups, educators, also people who work in diversity and inclusion, people who are trying to reach other segments of populations and communities. So The Roomba just started up, if you can hear the vacuum going. Pardon me 1 second. Okay, what kind of use was that? So, so we also wanted to reach out to people who are working in designing of public services and all other sorts of folks who use design. And we keep hearing from people we've had students coming from legal backgrounds, working in library science, working in engineering, working in public policy, and you name it, folks who have gone through the pop-up course we were doing on this work and just saying it made new ideas come alive for them in their fields. And as one person commented after a recent workshop that we did, she said, this approach opens up so many lenses. Like it's just each time you look at a new archetype, there's a new lens that sort of pops out at you. So we wanted to share that with you, that we think this is really valuable for a lot of folks. We have a website, it's rethinkingusers.com, and maybe Susanna will put that in the chat. And you'll notice if you go to our website, we've also specifically thought about people using the book and the toolkit in the classroom. So we've got some ideas about how educators could use it in design courses and social design courses, both in the classroom and in the studio. And so we've got some thoughts about how you could build curriculum around the book. You'll also find on the website that we have a section for distributed teams and remote workers, because when we were just finishing up on this book, it was still a couple of months before COVID-19, and we hadn't really thought about folks doing the exercises virtually. So we took some time and thought about how could you adapt each of the 6 major exercises in the book to work in an entirely virtual team space. And it really does, they do hold up quite well for that kind of a setting. So you could look there and get some ideas about how to conduct these remotely, even before we all get back together soon, we hope. The book is available now in the US, if you're here in the US, and which means it's now available anywhere on the earth. So you can find it from the usual suspects. You can go to Amazon.com. You could go to Powell's.com if you want to support a large indie. You could also just go to your neighborhood bookstore and say, could you order Rethinking Users for me by Youngblood, Cheslick, and Hadery, and they're likely to say, yes, I'm on it. And then you'll be able to enjoy it as well. And finally, we'd just like to say, if you're the type of person who reviews things and you are on Amazon or Goodreads or any site where you have an opportunity to review Rethinking Users, we'd really appreciate it because it gets more eyeballs on this. And we hope that it's, we're trying to push the discipline here a bit and move user-centered design forward in some ways. And so that being sort of a project that is, we hope, valuable to all of us, it would be really helpful to get some reviews out there. So thanks so much. I think I'm going to just pass the baton over to Susanna, who I think has been watching chat for any questions or comments.
I have, and I know as you're talking, it's hard to follow chat, but I really hope that you all 3 have a chance to go back because there's some really fun conversations happening in chat. There are a couple things I'm already seeing pop up. Now's the time, if you haven't already put anything in chat, if you have a burning question for any of these folks, we'll be looking at that. I think the other thing, Mike, I want to prompt you because the thing we talked about is where else there might be a chance to do this. And there was the epic that I think you wanted to mention. Did you want to mention that now, or do you want to mention that later?
Unmute. Sure, I can mention that now. We have an epic. So I mentioned at the beginning that we've been doing a lot of workshops around this content. So really diving in more deeply to the ideas here in Rethinking Users and engaging some of the exercises and thinking about how they might, the exercises might help you think about your design space or your business challenge in different ways. And so we have another one coming up. If you're familiar with the EPIC community, ethnographic praxis in design in industry conference. The we are doing on April 25, we're doing a workshop with Epic, and it's free for Epic members, but anybody can join Epic. And so if you go to epicpeople.org and you read about the organization, and if it seems like something that you'd be interested in, please do join. It's a great community of designers, design researchers, and social scientists who all think about design issues. And if you do join, please join us for our workshop on April 25.
April 14th, I think, actually.
That's
Today's the 25th.
That is much different, yes.
Yeah.
April 14. Yeah.
But there's probably something cool happening there on the 25th too. So, who knows?
Great. So I'm going to share with you one that I think maybe it was the first one came up. I can't, I'd have to like scroll through a lot of chat before I knew for sure, but I thought it was an interesting one. When you think of this book, there are a lot of questions about the book and the process, and it was really helpful. I think people really, really enjoyed seeing Nadim's design process coming in to bring that content to life in such an amazing and accessible way. I think there was a question around, as you've had this out in the world, I know we know it launched in the UK before it launched in the US, so it's been sort of trickling and now is home. It's fully fledged. Have you found that any unexpected people are drawn to the book or concept? Have you found surprising places that either you feel like you can apply it or that that people have come to you? Ben, you want to jump in first?
I will actually, yeah. And that this has been a nice surprise, is just to kind of see where people see an application. Just to go into it briefly, somebody reached out to me who's connected with the renewable energy sector, and don't think what he was talking about isn't just germane to that sector, but he said, obviously, this is a very socially minded and kind of an altruistic social enterprise space. It's also an industry in which companies are often run by engineers, and they're very technology focused. Mm-hmm. And energy being, almost like by definition, something that's ecosystemically connected. It's not just the single purchaser, say, of a set of solar panels who's the user of that device and what comes into it. He saw a lot of applications that this could be really a way to kind of concretely walk people who are starting with that technology focused perspective into thinking about who's the whole web of people and groups that are interconnected with each other through and around these products. So that was one big surprise that came out. That's
great. Thanks, Ben. Nadim or Mike, anything you wanted to add to that? Because questions are starting to come in. So,
sure.
We have plenty.
Yeah, I'll add something really quickly. We've got in our users, we've got one user that seems to resonate with a lot of folks, who's the oblique user. And the oblique user is a user who's like pretty far downstream from a product or service. Our little tagline for the oblique user is, I engage the solution through the byproducts of other people's engagement. And so that basically means like when folks use something, there is an end of life or a continuation of life, I should say, of that thing that they've used long after it leaves the hands of that direct primary user. And it may end up in a landfill where it has impact on another community. Maybe it's somebody who's, the oblique user is somebody who's very far removed in time and space from the original user. Maybe it's somebody who's scavenging things in a pile of discarded objects, or who is repurposing things. And so the oblique user really pushes us to think sort of like far out to the outer edges of the ecosystem, and how we might design differently that experience and more intentionally for that experience. Yeah. Thanks. Which seems to have repercussions and resonance sort of in a lot of industries.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. There's another couple questions coming up. I'm gonna do my best to combine them. So if anyone in the chat, I mangled your question, call me out and rephrase it but I feel like there's a couple things coming up. One of them was around how your work might have changed after you've worked through the process, the ideas in this book, your own personal work. Like, how have you changed your own process based on it? And I was actually, I'll take facilitator privilege and actually put this to Nadeem first, because I thought it was interesting you came in last and you have an industrial design background. And I'm really curious, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with that one, how has that articulated these ideas? Especially, I will combine it with this paying customer versus these other ecosystems in which businesses operate. That broadens the question some. I don't know how much you want to take that on, but I thought that might be you might have an interesting lens on those pieces.
Sure. Yeah. So it actually took, when I first started engaging this content, it took me back to like when I first got into design, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, because like once you know how things are made and you know the names of fonts and stuff like that, like all you see are like the injection molding process and what typography is being used. And like, I think this felt similar where like once I learned that some of the users, I feel like I constantly see them in the world. So I work at Amazon on hardware products. I can't really talk much about what I do, but I definitely see a lot of the archetypes kind of play out, especially in technology where you do like I think our relationship with technology is such that with smarter technology is like who's the agent using the technology. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and like it being used on you is like an interesting kind of two-way relationship that's has that idea that I think Ben and Mike kind of go into more in the book. I think has really struck me, and I think this, to me, like people who work in technology, I think this could be especially useful to think about not just the person using the device, but all the other members of the family, if it's in the home or out in the phone was a great example that kicked this off. But I think especially in things like smart home spaces and things like that, a lot of this is kind of like brought a lot of new ideas for me as well.
That's really helpful. And for me, distance learning definitely came to mind, the ecosystem in which learning is happening for many kids and students across and people across the country and the world. So that's what came up for me again. The next one I will ask is, let's see. The one, there was a funny one of how do you stop using the loud guy's phone? I thought that was a funny one. I don't know if any of you want to riff on that, but any advice on how to stop using loud guy's phone if you find yourself in that situation?
Bring a hammer, I guess. I don't know. Like
on your commute. Got it. That was very practical advice. Thank you.
We didn't spend a lot of time thinking through how you could actually redesign Loudman's phone to create a better experience for the other people on the train car.
Yeah.
But what we saw is a painful absence of any attempts to do any redesign like that.
Right.
So there were no sort of push notifications to Loudman to sort of moderate his voice.
Right.
Or no attempts to sort of create the microphone portion of the device, sort of capture his voice sort of best at a lower volume or anything like that.
Yeah, I did get a clarification. The question was actually, how do you more what you said, Mike, how do you design the phone for everyone else? But I actually, maybe I took it there. I love the image of like, what do you do if you're stuck as a user in someone else's experience? So I thought that was funny. So I did take liberties, I think. There was a question, a lot of interesting questions about your collaboration and the way you all three, I think you did a good job of sharing your process and sharing stories and some theory, and you all sort of came with different lenses. But there was definitely some admiration for pushing through on such a comprehensive book. And so, from the concepts to the visuals, what were some of the challenges as you pushed through collaboration? Like what were some of the things that really helped you get to this day where we're all on Zoom celebrating the launch?
Oh boy. Ben,
I'll jump in a little bit, and I'll just say that, and I was kind of reflecting on this going into the launch, that this felt like a very organic process, that this really did start out of a conversation around the dinner table at a restaurant about concepts that Mike and I really kind of found ourselves having and not having a venue for articulating in our work, at least not at that point. And this kind of moved through these iterations where we had to develop things well enough to try to go through a classroom setting at Stanford. And then those students really kind of pushed us and challenged us in the successive rounds of those that we taught. Any time when we had to work with another person or work with a team, like when we were teaching or doing a workshop, really pushed us to be rigorous in our thought, to really make sure these categories that we were coming up with actually made sense and held together. And I would also just say that once Nadim joined the team and we had to figure out how this all kind of made sense visually, I don't know what you would say about this, Mike. I think this really actually fundamentally deepened the ideas that we were trying to convey at the same time. I'll check in with you, Mike, and see what you think about that.
Before you go there, a question just came, Mike, just to add some color to what you say. The question was, how did you know you needed Nadim? Like what makes, maybe you can fold that part in as well.
How could we not have known we needed Nadim? So yeah, I think it was really amazing, sort of the generativity of bringing sort of Ben and I sort of working mostly in words and really rough sketches, and then bringing in Nadim and having sort of that conversation between the word and the image and the way both of them work to communicate. It really sort of made it tightened our ideas a lot, because as we saw them visualized, we'd think about the challenges of visualization, and that would help us think about, oh, there's something a little loose in that idea right there that makes it hard to visualize. Because if it was absolutely crystal clear what we were trying to say with this archetype or with this idea, it would be a lot clearer how to bring it to visual life. So that was fabulous.
That was
we knew we needed Nadim because we'd reached a point where we had basically had a manuscript, and we needed it to be more engaging, more usable. We wanted it to, we had a usability challenge with the manuscript. And so we knew we needed another kind of communication. And we also needed some really engaging artifacts that people could work with in the exercises. So we started, Ben and I met to talk about who we could bring in to do that. And I had one idea, and that was this guy.
Well, the question definitely prompted a lot of Nadim love in chat. So I think a lot of people would co-sign on everyone needs a Nadim or needs Nadim.
I mean, I would also just add that I was so impressed with Mike and Ben. Like, I sometimes have a hard time taking feedback well and iterating on it, but like in some of the first drafts that were given out to probably a lot of people on this call to get feedback, like they really changed fundamentally some of the ways the book was written, made it much more approachable, and we had some parts of the book, like the commercial kitchen, like emerged very much at the very end. So I think it was it was just I think we were super flexible, and like I bet now if you looked at like the first draft to where it's at, totally different.
Yeah. Night and day.
That's great. Thanks for that. I think another question that emerged is, where might you, like, if you had the magic wand and you had full control over the answer to this, where would you ideally take these concepts next? Ben.
I'm going to jump in on that, and I'll just say it briefly. I found myself thinking about this work constantly during the last election, which, as we all know, lasted a long time after Election Day. And I think we all learned a lot. I learned a lot in that process about the ecosystem of people and organizations that were involved in creating and making a vote count. That we have this image of, I had this image of sort of individuals. Maybe I kind of loosely knew that there were people who counted votes, but there's this entire infrastructure that's involved in making democracy real. And what I saw was, first of all, understanding that process, but also looking at the way that people who wanted to attack the process could use the fact that it was an ecosystem against it. That somehow the idea that, oh, there are these other people involved in helping someone vote, making their vote count, verifying their vote, that all these things are a reason to be suspicious of these votes. And it just struck me as such a bad faith misunderstanding of the idea that Mike and I were using, which is that no, everything is like this. everything has this ecosystem around it. There's nothing wrong with a product that has this kind of complicated set of relationships around it. They all do. If you look at it, if you look at them right, that's our proposition, and I think it's true. So that's really what struck me, is that I would like to take this idea to challenge the assumption that something complicated has to be suspicious somehow. So around the election stuff, but just in general. That's I'll hand it off to you guys. That's my spiel.
Thanks, Ben.
I'll let that stand.
Nadeem, if you had a magic wand, where would you take it? Any ideas where you would take it next? The concepts?
I don't know. I mean, I think, we just launched, and so I'm curious to just see this in the hands of more people. I'd love to hear feedback from all of you on how you're using it, and I think we will treat this like any other design project and iterate it from there.
Great. I'm going to again take facilitator privilege. If anyone on the call has ideas of where they would I'm just so curious now, like where people's heads are about where you would apply this, just toss it in chat. And we're not gonna be able to get to all of that, but I think it'd just be really interesting. You're all coming from different lenses, and I think it'd be really interesting to see what's resonating for you. I will say that in my world, education came up a ton, recess, even, and school systems and classrooms, and it really, I had a lot of people in my networks really thinking about educational spaces, for sure. So yeah, thank you for everyone for trying to add stuff in. That's really great. One more, and then I have a quick yes or no question at the end. But how does this toolkit change when applied to someone's passive products rather than active, like electronics, that kind of thing? How do you think about that differently if they're not interactive products?
Could I ask if somebody could put in the chat sort of could you elaborate on that? What is a passive product?
Yeah, I'll be more specific about the question. The question was around how does it change potentially when applied to passive products as opposed to active things like phones, Google Home, the interactive electronic. So I think it's more, you had the Roomba go off, and we've talked about phones, but what about if it's something that's doesn't have that interactivity that those products do?
Yeah. Well, I think if I could speak for Ben and myself, I think as anthropologists, we've been cultural anthropologists, we've been influenced a little bit by, if not a lot, by a strain of social theory called actor network theory, which looks at apparently supposedly benign, supposedly inert objects in the social world, and how those things influence human behavior and how they influence who we are and what we are. So, a classic example is, you think about a screwdriver, right? Mm-hmm. Put a screwdriver in the hands of somebody, and that person is now capable of doing other things, and is also even, the screwdriver in some ways suggests other things that person may do with that object, right? And so it's this way of looking at inert objects kind of disrupts the classic notion that the user is active and the thing is passive, because it's actually more of a relationship. So in the book, we're trying to look at how all things, whether they're smartphones or Roombas or Amazon Echo or any of those kinds of things, how they influence the whole ecosystem of users and other things. And so I guess I'd push back a little bit on the idea that there are passive products and services. They create possibility, and they create the ecosystems in a dynamic relationship with everything else.
Thanks, Mike. Nadeem, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, or did you want to just let Ben and Mike's comment stand?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think in the book there's not a ton of focus on technology. I think it's treated in general more abstractly, and also I think we talk a lot about space. Like Commercial Kitchen was an example, but a lot of the built environment and the cities that we live in and things like that. And I think again, like there might be sort of passive objects in that system, but like the overall, the city, the spaces are quite dynamic and interactive.
Yeah, Ben, did you want to add something in?
I will, yeah, and because I think it's a great point that we really created this, like Mike said, he and I share a background. We're cultural anthropologists working in design research. And so we want this to be practical to people doing our kind of work, but also, we all use the things that people design. That's what humans do. And this book is really meant for everyone. And it's not just if you have a product or you're trying to design a product, but to understand the products that you work with and just the designs that you work with. And Mike got his start studying the design of social movements, and I got my start studying the design of certain kinds of recorded music and New York City. So we were actually very careful in the book, and I think this really evolved over time to make sure that we drew examples from really the whole range of areas we could think of and not focus on any one particular sector, to really keep ourselves honest that way. That's what I'd say.
I really appreciate that. And one thing I'll also say that for any of you in the audience who work with non-designers or lead teams of people who don't have design, capital D, somewhere in their background, this book is so accessible with the cards. Like, you almost don't even, you want the book because it's awesome, but the cards themselves, leading a team to think this way, it just gives a really tactical, tangible way to engage a non-design audience. And so it's very accessible. So I would say that, digitally until we can do it in person, but I think that it gets at all those other, it can use those other spaces, those non-digital spaces as well. And by the way, again, afterwards, you're getting a lot of good new ideas in the chat. Speaking of digital, I think this might be our last question, actually. It's an easy one. What parts of this book kit are available digitally?
Ben? We've had a big discussion about
this.
Yes,
but currently none. And that's, in part by necessity that we're rolling this out, and the initial existence is physical. We've certainly been getting a lot of feedback from people that finding a way to build an interactive version of this is something that people are interested in. I think we'll want to learn what people need that to do before to fully create it. Mm-hmm. And as Mike said, on the website, we tried to give enough tools to create a bridge so that as we're understanding what this is going to mean as a virtual supplement or a virtual version, if you get into what we suggested for virtual teams and change or create things, please let us know, because we need that feedback.
Great. And what's the best way to get in touch with you if they do have thoughts about that? For any of you, I'm not trying to put Ben in the hot on that one, by the way.
I'll put my email address in the chat, and I think you can contact us through the website as well. I think, right, Nadeem? I can't.
We can add something like that.
Okay, sorry.
Let's add it.
This is co-design in action. Co-creation. That's great. So we are just at, here on the West Coast in the United States, we're at 5:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so we are, unless there are other really big questions, again, I can put some links in the chat for those of you who still need them. And in terms of being able to find this online, hopefully if I just, there we go. And those include some links to UK sites as well, the publisher site, if you want to see what else BIS Publishing has been up to as well. And of course, the site that's specific for the book as well, where you can buy it that way. So with that, unless there are last burning questions or pearls of wisdom that haven't yet been discovered, I'm going to say thank you all so much for joining. We have really appreciated, it's been a joy to facilitate this conversation. I'm serious about that chat. You guys have got to go read the chat after. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.